Postgate-Cole. It was written in November 1915, which is quite interesting because it was written during the First World War. To me, I think of a woman who's riding past trees, autumn time obviously because the leaves are brown and they're falling. The way she describes them as falling reminds me of how, well, reminds her of how the soldiers die in battle. They fall like leaves, which suggests that if they're falling like leaves, there's lots of them dying.
Yeah, I would say, I was going to add to that and say that the number of leaves and the loss of life, but also, leaves fall off the tree when they're dead, so it adds to the impact of the dead soldiers and the fragility of life just as in nature. And that I think the mood is set in autumn, sort of at the start of winter maybe, because it talks about snowflakes as well. And it's sort of snowflakes falling silently. You get this impression of sort of quietness about the tone she's listening, sort of filled with maybe some regret as well.
I think the other thing as well is the timing of the poem. It's almost sort of like a year into the war, and everyone presumed the war would have been over by then, and sort of a reminder about how it very much isn't. And I mean, she was quite the rebel though, wasn't she, Margaret Postgate-Cole? She was an anarchist and a feminist, and I think although she's done it in a very sort of again understated way, that's quite a controversial poem for the time. I think it's a very critical poem, alluding to the fact that really soldiers were sent there under lies, really, that there was going to be a quick war, they were going to be over soon and back home with the families.
Yeah, I mean, interesting you said that everyone expected the war to be over there, because they did all expect to be over within 6 months by Christmas really, so maybe that also kind of links in with the sort of the winter theme of the poem, even though it's a year further on, and that winter is now sort of being used to sort of express the death that is happening.
So in terms of language, the whole thing is in itself a metaphor. So the fallen leaves, like we alluded to before, represents the dying soldiers. There is metaphorical language all the way through it. One example being brown leaves on the second line, where the brown obviously references the colour of the uniform.
A feature on the fourth line, this repeated W sound, so no wind will then whistling to the sky. With that, obviously if there's no wind, then the leaves are falling off the tree off their own accord, so like the soldiers, they're dropping.
Yeah, I also picked the simile out on line 6, they fell like snowflakes wiping out the moon, and this suggests the multitude really of men who died. Also snowflakes linking to the bitter cold, which could also indicate the conditions in the trenches that they were suffering from. And leaves and snowflakes again connected to nature, sort of suggesting that life is fragile and the soldier's life is fragile as well. And I just really like the picture of sort of the noonday sun not being seen because of the amount, and it just, if we've ever witnessed an eclipse before, it is a really strange experience, so to imagine it's that amount of soldiers actually dying is really quite horrifying.
Gives quite an eerie feeling, doesn't it, as well?
I think with your example, Laura, as well, the no wind, will and whistling to the sky almost suggests she's making a comment that it's going unnoticed, or it's not getting the sort of attention and recognition it deserves, which again links to some of the other poems, isn't it?
Yeah. And also the line, which now all withering lay, when she's actually referring to the dead soldiers. And that's again sort of comparing the soldiers to leaves that would sort of rot on the ground, just like the soldiers may be rotting, especially given that further on she uses words such as strewed to suggest that they weren't properly buried, they were just flung carelessly around. Both in life, their lives were sort of not looked after, but also in death, maybe there wasn't time to bury them and they didn't sort of get an honourable burial.
So what do we think about the structure of the poem that Cole's used?
Well, I think it's interesting because it's just one stanza which is one long complex sentence, and there's a really good use of punctuation to sort of help and add impact to our understanding of the poem really. In particular the semicolon used halfway down, which sort of suggests the difference between the first part of the poem talking about the leaves and the second part of the poem talking about in more detail about the soldiers and how they died really. And there's a comparison of the leaves falling for no good reason and the soldiers dying for no good cause that you get in those two different sections. What do you think?
There's also the repetition of the snowflakes, which could emphasise that it's now going into winter and they're still out there, the soldiers are still fighting, even though they were told that it would be finished by Christmas.
Yeah, definitely. Another good use of punctuation I thought was on line 5, where they use the comma, where it says "but thickly, silently," which creates a pause which emphasises the mass of the falling leaves and the many soldiers who fell. I just think, you know, sort of all of the commas allow you to sort of think about the message and what she's trying to put across, really. Another thing I noticed was sort of the rhyme throughout, which I think adds to sort of the peaceful tone of the poem, and it also helps some of the imagery sort of stick in your head as well, a bit more.
I really like this poem. I like the fact that she had the courage really to criticise the decision to war and the fact it was still going on, which you could get arrested for if you were a conscientious objector in those times. So the fact she had the courage and bravery to do that, I think, is the main reason I like that poem.
I like it just because it's quite a simple idea, quite a simplistic use of using nature to describe the loss of the soldiers.
Yeah, no, and in particular my favourite line is sort of when it gets a bit more harsh in its description, line 10, where it says "slain by no wind of age or pestilence," which is emphasising that they weren't ready to die, they were young, they were healthy, and their death was caused by man, by no other reason. Otherwise they would still be alive, really. And I just think that's quite powerful, really, when you imagine just how young they were, just like we see on the news today when, just at the weekend, when the 3 soldiers that died, they're probably 20, 21 or something, so it really hits home just how much of their life is wasted. So what poems would you like the fallen leaves to then?
I think I'd compare it with Poppies, just simply because again it's linked with the idea of soldiers going to war, young soldiers, obviously dying before they're ready.
Yeah, I'd link it to Mammoth's Wood for similar reasons really. It's both make you think about the loss of life and really emphasise how important it is to remember how many lives were lost and to try and avoid a situation like that again.
Also, I think with Mammoth's Wood you've got the comparison to nature, both of the